Hello, friends. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Here, I share a brand new story every day. If you enjoy my videos, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's dive into today's story. Horror in the house. During the day, when the sun warms the rooms and the windows are wide open, we hardly notice it. The fresh breeze carries the scent of blooming flowers and the faint traces of earth from the garden. There's always a lot happening in our home in the evenings. My mother bustling around the kitchen, my two siblings fighting over their games in the living room. From upstairs, my uncle's deep, resonant laughter mixes with the laughter from his old TV shows. And through it all, there's the soft jazz playing from my father's ancient record player, its music muted by the twists and turns of the narrow hallways. The house is cozy and inviting until everyone goes to bed and the house begins to breathe. The shadows never stay put, and the stagnant air feels heavy with an unfamiliar taste. The lights, no matter how many are turned on, never seem to fill the room. The silence is never truly silent. There's a palpable sense of emptiness, even softer than the creaking floorboards or the rustling wooden shutters. It feels as if the house has learned how to play the sound of silence to mask something we weren't meant to hear. There's an unspoken rule in our house that we remain quiet at night. Sometimes we might catch each other in the hallways or while searching the fridge for a midnight snack. We exchange nods or whispers, but we never speak out loud. Even as children, my siblings and I never broke the silence. It always felt like a breach of respect, like shouting in a church, as though we were interrupting something sacred that existed long before we were born and would persist long after we were gone. Old electrical wiring can have that effect, my father once said. He never elaborated on what that effect was or how a faulty fuse box could make it feel like something in the dark was listening to our breaths. I sort of like it though, you know? Makes me feel snug, like the house is tucking me in at night. It has to do with the ventilation system, my mother said. I felt it too when we first moved in, but honestly, I hardly even notice it anymore. Just leave a window open if it bothers you. I didn't know how to explain that the house didn't want the windows open at night. It was as if I had pushed one of my siblings off the sofa and then turned my back on them. I wouldn't need to see their face to know they were angry. They wouldn't need to shout or hit me back. I would just feel the anger simmering behind me in the air until I apologized and gave them their seat back. That's how it was with the house, suffocating me with its anger until I closed the window and let it settle. No one builds a house to feel like this. If you're asking me why, then that's your answer. No one ever built this house. It just grew this way. I preferred my uncle's explanation, even though I never fully understood it. My parents were always occupied with something, and my siblings would never let me hear the end of it if I admitted to being afraid. My uncle liked having me visit because no one else did. His legs no longer worked, and he never got up except to drag himself to the bathroom. I would sit on the edge of his bed after bringing him food and listen to him talk about the feelings I couldn't describe. Don't give me that look. People act like I'm broken just because I don't move around anymore. But being inside all the time has given me and the house a chance to get to know one another. The house told me about how people come along, cut down trees, and build houses, and how the land is hurt by it. How do I know? Because as soon as those people leave, the land tries to heal itself. Gardens take over, weeds grow high, and animals jump fences. Given enough time, you'd never know people were ever there. Well, it's the same with this house, only in reverse. The land here was hurt long before settlers arrived, and so the land did what it always does. It grows and heals. But some wounds run so deep they never heal properly. So the land has to grow up a house to trap the hurt inside and never let it go. You're only saying that because you're thinking about your legs, I told him. How can a house grow out of the ground with all the wires and pipes and things? My uncle laughed, his deep chuckle so much a part of the house that it might as well be coming from the walls themselves. The house didn't grow from scratch. The shape of it swelled up like a blister on the land. Then people came along and thought it was an abandoned house someone else built. So they fixed it up and made it livable, well, as livable as it could be, considering where it came from, and now it's our turn to watch over it. What about the hurt that caused it to grow? Where did that go? You wouldn't be asking that if you didn't already know. Some hurts never go away, so you might as well make them your friend because they'll be with you until the end. If the house ever decides it doesn't want us here, you'll know it without me having to tell you. I wouldn't have remembered those words if they weren't true. I think the house really did care for my uncle. And my uncle must have cared back because even when his condition worsened, he wouldn't let my parents take him to the hospital. He never raised his voice, but he was adamant that there would be anger if they made him leave. I remember how odd it sounded when he said there would be anger instead of he would be angry. But what mattered most was that he stayed, and my parents were worried. Like the house, they never explained exactly what was wrong. I didn't sleep much that night, and I was awake when I heard my uncle gasping for air. It surprised me that my first reaction was anger at him for making so much noise when the house wanted silence. His breathing grew more desperate, and it didn't take long for me to wake my parents. Everything became chaotic. My siblings shouting, my parents arguing, and the wail of an ambulance approaching. My uncle would have fought them off if he'd been conscious when they carried him out. I know he would have tried harder to convince us of the anger he had promised if he could. My parents rode with the ambulance, leaving just me and my siblings at home, already scared and anxious about our uncle. It wouldn't have taken much to set us off or make us imagine devils in the darkness. My siblings were so upset that they couldn't stop talking about the neighbors watching from their porches, the beeping machines the medical responders carried, and what would happen to my uncle. Their shouting grew louder and louder until one of them said my uncle would die. The shouting didn't stop, even when they finally quieted down. It sounded just like my siblings, the noise reverberating through the hallways upstairs. Only the voices weren't shouting about my uncle anymore. They were threatening each other with such cruelty and violence that I flinched as if I were feeling phantom pain. My siblings didn't understand what was happening and grew angrier at each other, threatening real violence as they accused one another of trying to scare them. One of them grabbed the other's throat, and the other did the same. Both faces turned red as they strained to strangle each other. I held my breath from the tension as I tried to pull them apart, and it was then I noticed something else was drawing breath. Hot and heavy and angry, the force growing with each disembodied breath. The air pulled us up the stairs, whipping curtains, twisting rugs, and tearing pictures from the walls. The heat and pressure intensified, and my siblings continued to fight, tumbling end over end. The shouts and threats became even more intense upstairs, joined by unfamiliar voices. Men and women of all ages, their voices filled with hatred and loathing, cursing us as if we were the cause of every misery in their lives. Their hatred and anger were so overwhelming that I felt guilty, convinced that I deserved whatever punishment was coming. The voices of children, wailing and screaming at us with revulsion, were the hardest to bear. Their suffering made me feel so guilty that I was convinced I deserved whatever was coming. One of my siblings had stopped fighting back. He lay limp on the floor with the other's hands still around his throat, their faces barely recognizable from their exertion. The heat and pressure began to subside, and the wind retreated through the cracks in the floorboards and walls. The air became sharp and cold as the windows and doors slammed shut, snapping into place like brittle bones. I knew the house was giving me a chance to escape its hurt and hatred. I understood that I would be safe if I fled now, leaving my siblings to whatever fate awaited them. But I also knew that I would carry the hurt of what I allowed to happen with me for the rest of my life, with no hope of solace or redemption. I went through one of the open doors, but not to escape. Instead, I went to my uncle's room, climbed into his bed, and covered myself with the damp blanket that still held his scent. I cried until the last echo of anger settled into quiet, replaced by the soft, familiar chuckling that had always seemed to come from the house itself. There is a spirit in the house that no one built. It carries a hurt so ancient that I don't think it will ever heal. But I know that spirit by name, and I call him my uncle. I told him it's okay if he never leaves because I'm never going to leave him either. At night, I keep the windows closed and stay very quiet. Together, We have found peace. Someday, another will name their hurt, and they will know it's me, and I will never be alone. The shadow I saw at a hotel. Last month, my sister Lily and I decided to take a weekend trip to a quaint little town called Fairview, nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. We were looking forward to some relaxation and sightseeing, and we checked into the Fairview Inn, a charming old hotel that had been in operation since the late 1800s. The building had a rustic charm with its antique furniture and creaky wooden floors, but it also exuded an air of mystery that was both intriguing and unsettling. Our room was on the second floor, at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The wallpaper was faded and peeling in places, and the old-fashioned lamps cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. Despite the slightly creepy ambiance, we were excited about our stay and unpacked our bags quickly. That first night, we stayed up late chatting and watching a movie. Around 1 a.m., we decided to call it a night. I climbed into the plush, yet slightly lumpy bed, and despite the comfortable surroundings, I found it hard to fall asleep. Something about the room felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Around 3 a.m., I woke up feeling a strange urge to use the bathroom. As I opened my eyes, I saw a shadowy figure peeking out from the bathroom door. My heart raced, but I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light. I really needed to use the toilet, so I forced myself out of bed and walked towards the bathroom, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. The bathroom was small and dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. As I turned on the light, the shadow vanished. I used the toilet as quickly as I could, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I washed my hands and glanced nervously at the mirror above the sink. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but as I turned off the light and stepped back into the room, I saw it again, a shadow in the mirror directly in front of my bed. My breath caught in my throat and I stood frozen in place, staring at the spot where the shadow had just been. Then it vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Lily stirred and sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes. "What are you doing?" she asked sleepily. "Nothing," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want to scare her. "Just couldn't sleep. Go back to bed." She shrugged and lay back down, falling asleep almost immediately. I climbed into bed too, but sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. My mind kept replaying the eerie images, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in the room. Morning finally came, and with the first light of dawn, the oppressive atmosphere of the room seemed to lift slightly. I got up, dressed quickly, and ran out to the truck, desperate to escape the lingering unease. Lily took her time packing our things, giving me puzzled looks as she moved about the room. "Why are you in such a hurry?" she asked, clearly confused by my behavior. I don't know. I had a weird night," I admitted, not ready to divulge the full story. "Let's just get out of here." As we drove away from the Fairview Inn, I couldn't shake the memory of the shadow. The hotel had given me a weird, creepy, and undeniably bad vibe. I began to wonder if what I had seen was a demon. It was my first encounter with anything remotely supernatural, and it had left me deeply unsettled. Could it have been a spirit? I didn't know. All I knew was that it was terrifying, and I couldn't explain it. I had heard tales of demons and spirits lingering in places that exuded a creepy and foreboding atmosphere. The old hotel, with its long history and antique furnishings, seemed like the perfect setting for such an encounter. I still haven't told Lily about the shadow. Part of me doesn't want to scare her, and another part of me isn't sure if she'll even believe me. But I can't stop thinking about it. I keep replaying the moment in my mind, wondering if there was something I missed, some detail that could explain what I saw. The presence of the mirror directly in front of my bed only added to my fear. I had heard stories about the dangers of sleeping in front of mirrors, about how they could serve as portals for spirits and other entities. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the shadow had something to do with that mirror. Despite my fear, I'm oddly proud of myself for using the bathroom after seeing the shadow. It's something I never thought I would do, especially after watching so many horror movies about demons and ghosts. But necessity trumped fear that night, and I faced whatever it was, even if only for a moment. As we drove away from Fairview, I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. Haunted Hotel in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. This was a wild experience, the kind of night you just want to end as quickly as possible. It was June 2021, at the peak of summer. My girlfriend Sarah and I planned a trip from Denver to Aspen, Glenwood Springs, and Snowmass. We had a fondness for the charming hotels operated by Colorado Tourism. These state-operated hotels, though government-run, offered unmatched hospitality and delectable food. Most of these hotels were housed in historic buildings that dated back to the late 19th century. Our stays in Aspen and Snowmass were serene and delightful. However, our stay in Glenwood Springs was different, memorable in a way we hadn't anticipated. We had booked a night at Hotel Mountain View in Glenwood Springs. Nestled between the Glenwood Springs Hot Springs and the Glenwood Caverns Adventure Park, the hotel seemed like an ideal vacation spot during the day, but at night it revealed a different side. We checked in around 2 p.m., stowed our bags, enjoyed a hearty lunch at the hotel restaurant, and spent the day exploring the nearby attractions, including a historic church built in the 1880s. As dusk settled over the town, we returned to our room. The atmosphere in the hotel seemed to shift with the fading light. That's when we first heard it. The noise coming from the room next to ours. It sounded like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor and muffled voices having an intense conversation. At first, I thought it was just other guests being inconsiderate. I decided to open our door and ask them to keep it down. But when I stepped into the hallway, it was eerily silent. The corridor stretched out in both directions, dimly lit and empty. There was no one there, no sound at all. Darkness pooled in the corners, and the only thing I could hear was the distant hum of the building's old ventilation system. I shrugged it off, thinking perhaps the old building was playing tricks on us. We moved to the balcony, seeking the comfort of the fresh evening air. We opened a bottle of gin we had brought along and ordered a few lemonades from room service. The cool breeze was refreshing, and we tried to relax, sipping our drinks and enjoying the view of the distant mountains bathed in twilight. After a while, we decided to head downstairs to the restaurant for dinner. Our room, 301, was on the top floor, a corner room with a staircase on one side and other rooms on the other. As we descended, the wooden stairs creaked under our weight, adding to the eerie ambiance. The restaurant was cozy and the food delicious, but an unsettling feeling lingered in the back of my mind. After dinner, we took a stroll in the hotel's garden to digest our meal before heading to bed. The garden was beautiful, with neatly trimmed hedges and blooming flowers, but as we walked further, the night seemed to press in around us. There was a long layout of metal tables and chairs, painted white, arranged in a conference-like setup. As we passed by, the metal chairs creaked and groaned as if unseen guests were shifting in their seats. It sounded like a ghostly dinner party was taking place, the faint murmurs of conversation just out of earshot. One of the hotel staff approached us, a concerned look on his face. He advised us not to wander too far into the garden at this hour, for safety reasons, he said. We nodded, feeling the weight of his words, and made our way back to our room. Back in our room, the noises from the adjacent room grew louder and more persistent. It sounded like someone was furiously rearranging the furniture, the constant thud and scrape echoing through the walls. The knocking started then, soft at first, then more insistent. Our bedroom door rattled with each knock. I called out, asking who was there, but received no response. Growing increasingly uneasy, I called the restaurant and asked them to send up some drinking water. Moments later, the door knocked again. I opened it, expecting to see a staff member, but there was no one there. The knocking continued, 5 times between my call for water and the arrival of the staff member. When he finally arrived, I asked him about the noises and the knocks. He looked puzzled, but promised to check into it before hurrying away. The noises persisted throughout the night, growing more unbearable. We struggled to sleep, our nerves frayed by the incessant sounds. Morning finally arrived, bringing with it a sense of relief. The sun's rays filtered through the curtains, chasing away the shadows of the night. The corridor, once filled with eerie noises, was now silent. During checkout, Sarah insisted I ask the hotel manager about the disturbances. Reluctantly, I approached the reception. The manager greeted us warmly, and I brought up the noise issue. He seemed genuinely surprised. Since you are a couple, we thought of giving you privacy by assigning you the top floor corner room so you wouldn't be disturbed. We couldn't sleep all night because of the continuous sounds of people talking and furniture moving around, I explained. The manager's expression changed. He glanced at the staff nearby, who exchanged uneasy looks. The room next to yours was empty. In fact, there were no other guests on your entire floor. Sarah and I stared at each other, the reality of what we had experienced sinking in. We left the hotel in a daze, the staff's silence adding to the sense of unease. We drove to our next destination, Snowmass, and spent the entire day recovering from the sleepless night. The memory of that stay is now etched in our minds. Even now, I wonder what we truly encountered that night. Was it the lingering presence of the past or something else entirely? For as long as I can remember, sleep has never been a sanctuary for me. From the tender age of 5, I have been tormented by sleep paralysis, a phenomenon where the mind awakens, but the body remains frozen, trapped in a state of limbo between dreams and reality. This cruel affliction plagued me every night without fail. I grew up in the quiet town of Willow Creek, nestled deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Our house, an old Victorian mansion, had been in the family for generations. Its creaking floorboards and whispering walls held stories of their own, but none were as terrifying as the one I am about to share. In Willow Creek, tales of the supernatural were common, and everyone had their own version of a ghost story. But for me, the horror was personal and unrelenting. My family followed an ancient tradition that blended elements of Christianity with local folklore. I often heard that sleep paralysis was caused by malevolent spirits or demons lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on their unsuspecting prey. Every night, as I lay in bed beside my mother, I would pray fervently for protection. My prayers were a mix of ancient incantations and personal pleas, a desperate attempt to ward off the darkness that awaited me. Despite my fear, I would often challenge the unseen entity, invoking the name of Saint Michael, the archangel, to shield me from harm. The dreams always began the same way. As I drifted off to sleep, a kaleidoscope of colors would burst into my mind, swirling and twisting until they formed a grotesque rainbow. Then I would feel an invisible force pulling me downward, as if I were being sucked into the very bowels of the earth. The descent was rapid and terrifying, and I would land in the gnarled hands of a witch, her eyes gleaming with malevolence. The witch, a nightmarish figure, draped in tattered black robes, would drag me to a jagged rock altar deep in a shadowy forest. She would chant in an ancient, guttural language, her voice resonating with dark power. Despite the fear gripping my heart, I would find myself dressed like a medieval princess, a stark contrast to the horror surrounding me. The witch's bony fingers would trace intricate patterns on my skin as she performed her dark rituals. One night, the dream altered slightly. Instead of landing immediately in the witch's grasp, I found myself in a dark, twisted forest. The trees seemed to move, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Shadows danced around me, whispering my name. Each step I took echoed in the silence, amplifying the sense of dread that gripped me. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I stumbled upon a clearing where the witch awaited me. Her eyes gleamed with a sinister light, and the ground beneath her seemed to pulsate with dark energy. She extended her hand, and I felt an invisible force compelling me to approach her. "You cannot escape," she hissed, her voice sending shivers down my spine. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were encased in cement. Summoning all my courage, I shouted, "Saint Michael, protect me!" The forest echoed with my plea, and the witch recoiled, her grip on me loosening. Tashar. On another night, the dream took me to a place I had never seen before, a realm of mirrors. Everywhere I looked, there were reflections of myself, distorted and twisted. The air was thick with an eerie silence, and my own reflection seemed to mock me. The witch appeared in one of the mirrors, her face contorted into a sinister grin. "Your fears will consume you," she taunted. Each mirror showed a different version of me, some crying, some screaming, and others standing in silent terror. The witch's voice grew louder, reverberating through the mirror realm. Desperate to break free, I closed my eyes and began to chant, "Saint Michael, protect me." When I opened my eyes, the mirrors shattered, and I found myself back in the familiar dark forest, but the witch's presence was weaker. One particularly harrowing night, I found myself in an endless corridor, its walls lined with ancient, flickering torches. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, and each step I took felt like walking through quicksand. The witch's laughter echoed through the corridor, growing louder and more menacing with each step. I saw doors lining the corridor, each marked with strange symbols. I tried opening one, but it led to another identical corridor. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped in an infinite maze. The witch's laughter grew louder, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. As despair threatened to overwhelm me, I fell to my knees and prayed with all my might. Saint Michael, protect me! A brilliant light pierced through the darkness, and the corridor began to collapse. The walls crumbled, revealing the night sky above. I woke up with a start, my heart racing, but relieved to be free from the nightmare's grip. The climax of my ordeal came on a stormy night. Thunder rumbled in the distance as I drifted into sleep. This time, I found myself in a desolate wasteland, the sky dark and ominous. The witch stood before me, more powerful and terrifying than ever. "You cannot escape me," she snarled, her eyes burning with hatred. She raised her hands, and the ground beneath me trembled. Dark tendrils of energy snaked towards me, threatening to engulf me. For the first time, I felt truly powerless. But then, a blinding light erupted from the heavens, illuminating the wasteland. Saint Michael descended, his fiery sword held high. With a single powerful strike, he banished the witch into oblivion. The light grew brighter, engulfing everything in its radiance. I felt a warmth and peace I had never known before. The dream shattered, and I awoke to the sound of rain tapping against my window. The nightmares had finally ended. From that night on, the witch never returned, and I slept peacefully for the first time in years. I still live in Willow Creek, and the old Victorian mansion remains as eerie as ever. But now, it holds no fear for me. I know that, no matter what darkness may come, I am protected by a force greater than any evil that lurks in the shadows. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.